Okay, hello and welcome to the Tree Planners podcast for March 2022. And this week, Margaret's over there virtually. I'm looking at her on my screen. There she is. And we're joined by Madeleine Fournier of Stop Sprawl Orillia, and I'm sure like another whole bunch of initiatives she's probably involved in. But I think we're mostly going to be talking about sprawl today and farmland preservation, natural heritage preservation, and things like that. So welcome, Madeleine.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about stopping sprawl.
It's our favorite topic.
It is one of our favorites. So people are like, oh my gosh, how much more can these people talk about sprawl? Like, I think we get it by now.
Yeah. Well, on that point, Margaret, you want to do a brief synopsis of that analysis that Emma McIntosh just published today?
I can. Emma McIntosh from the Narwhal, did an article. She FOI'd Freedom of Information request, Ministry of Natural Resources, Ontario's Ministry of Natural Resources, to see what they thought this report that they were supposed to release but then didn't, on the status of wetlands and biodiversity and that sort of thing across Ontario, and find out that wetlands are in decline, which most of us that are paying attention already know, and that it's getting worse under this existing government. And she also brought up, one of our other pet projects, which is opposing the Bradford bypass, was talking about how, even wetlands being so problematic, their health and declining, and how important they are for biodiversity, we're still plowing highways through them. So that's my synopsis. You probably have a better way to talk about it than I do, Adam, but that was what I got out of it.
No, you're the one with the good head for details. And I think that sort of the important element of it that I saw anyways was the tension between what the government is pushing as, they're framing it as, economic growth and recovery from COVID and these sorts of things. Stronger, better, all these terms that they use to try and sell things to the public. But in the meantime, they are trying to hide the impacts that particular agenda will have on all Ontarians. This is the core thing about environmentalism is it's not an individual thing, right? It's a common good. It's something that's accessible to all of us and that benefits all of us. So when the environment is impacted, that's an impact that is borne by all Ontarians. But when a subdivision is built or a strip mall is built, not all Ontarians benefit from that. It's primarily the developer who profits mostly, and then perhaps the operator of that mall and these sorts of things. But so there's that tension there, and I think that tension is highlighted by the fact that they tried to prevent this information from being public.
Mm-hmm. And, to build onto that, Adam, when you're saying about how it's good for the economy, I just read another article today. Sorry to the author, but I can't remember who it was now, talking about a York University professor, I believe, estimated that the amount of money that's being put into highways, you could actually put that money into building retrofits, and you would create more jobs and do obviously more for the climate than building a highway. So, that's all really interesting, how it's always like, if we pave this over, think of all the economic benefits, when really there are maybe potentially larger benefits without as much damage that people aren't really wanting to look into, because frankly, this is just how we do it. This is what we know, and this is what we build, and this is how we pave it and raise it. And then we're not willing to compare against alternatives, right? Well,
and that economic benefit argument is a very fraught one, the way that's presented to the public. That there's an economic benefit to building a highway because you can transport goods, get goods to market faster, reduce congestion, so people spend less time sitting in their cars and more time at work, or the nicer part of that might be more time at home with their family doing things that they actually want to be doing. Not that everybody doesn't want to work. There's people out there who love their jobs. But anyways, I'm getting distracted. But economic activity typically has externalities. And, if you've listened to us talk or read anything that we've written, or we often mention the externalities of development of economic activity. And basically that's the knock-on impacts that aren't captured by the activity itself, right? So you could build a highway, and that has sort of immediate and obvious costs, such as you're losing the land underneath the highway that might otherwise be available to animals for habitat, or for farmers for growing food. But we're starting to learn that, this has actually been around for a little while. There's within, or maybe outside, external to economics, there's a couple of fields. There's environmental economics and ecological economics. And ecological economics is sort of a step further than environmental economics. And these really sort of interrogate the externalities and the full cost that economic activity has. And these fields have been around for a while, but they're clearly not in the public, well known in the public discourse around economics. So to wrap this up, I'll try to wrap this up kind of quickly, because we've already gotten sort of slightly off topic. And Margaret and I are ranting on here about the stuff that we always rant on. Yeah, sorry. But we're understanding, for instance, and the big one is that greenhouse gases result from the activity ultimately that takes place on those highways that are built. And that's an externality, because we all pay for the impacts of that. We discovered back when there was leaded gasoline and before we had catalytic converters, that there was a really negative impact that lead was having on people and especially people who live near highways, which tended to be racialized, marginalized people in poor areas where highways tended to be situated. And there's a really surprising stat that came out just recently that argues that about 50% of the adult population in the United States actually has suffered brain damage because of this, which is crazy when you think. I mean, it's totally mind-boggling. But that's an externality, right? That's a cost. So if you think about the economic benefits that come from creativity, from imagination, from inspiration, from all these, so-called thought leaders like to talk a lot in a big game about innovation. In my opinion, that's not very imaginative to use that word, but the economic benefits that could have accrued from that collective spark that was lost because of our reliance, basically just simply our reliance on fossil fuels in the car, is something to think about. And that's what an externality is. So just that is my long-winded way of getting at that economic activity argument that is often made for these types of developments. And as we just sort of mentioned, this analysis that Emma McIntosh managed to get, wrote about these documents she got with the FOI, the loss of wetlands, the loss of natural habitat, agricultural land, all these sorts of things. These are the externalities that come from this development agenda that this government has been so aggressive in pushing. Yeah, and that's sprawl. And that's that's the topic of our podcast.
That's a really good segue, because we have Madeleine on here today, and there has been before. I'll kind of go into how I met Madeleine. But there has been a movement, and people may have known it in Hamilton or in Halton or Peel or Durham. There tends to be these Stop Sprawl kind of campaigns popping up, because just like you said, Adam, people are kind of feeling that there's got to be something better than just strip malls and ticky-tacky housing, which actually does nothing to help with the affordability of housing. It does nothing about creating a community. It does nothing for our food security. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So I was pulling some people together about, let's see if, Orillia was going through its MCR process at land use planning, pulling some people together. And Madeleine popped on. This is how I remember it, Madeleine. And then wrote me an email shortly thereafter saying, do you think we should start like a Stop Sprawl Orillia? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Let's have a meeting. And like, you want to head it up? Like, you go for it, girl. And so Madeleine has, along with a few others, have been really instrumental in bringing back a vision to what governments are supposed to be looking at, which is how do we make our communities stronger? And you and I, Adam, we went to the Inch Farm, which is one of the wetlands that potentially could be taken over with Orillia wanting to expand its boundaries. But anyways, that's how I met Madeleine. And she is a rising star within the local organizing community, I would say, and been really fortunate to kind of work with her closely. So that's great. So Madeleine, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
You had to twiddle your thumbs while Adam and I ranted on about lots of stuff. It happens to all the guests, so don't worry. So just to start, why don't you lay out for the people listening, if they're not familiar, what's happening with Orillia? What is the thing that's happening in Orillia that caused Stop Sprawl Orillia to come to life?
Yeah, so in, I think, November of 2021, the city of Orillia announced that they got consultants to make this land needs assessment. And it was determined that Orillia doesn't have enough lands within the city to accommodate for population growth because Ontario government is mandating municipalities to plan for population growth to the year 2051, obviously. And so Orillia got this land needs assessment. It was determined we don't have enough room within the boundary to accommodate population, and so we need to expand the boundary. So they announced this and shared the land needs assessment, and then they announced a public town hall that was happening in December, and I attended the public town hall. It was just to get like community input on the most appropriate areas for expansion. And there's over 200 people there, and I witnessed like one of the greatest public oppositions to any city initiative in recent memory. I think the consultants might have been a little shocked. They were expecting people to just give suggestions for where to expand, but basically everybody spoke in opposition to the boundary expansion, saying we don't want the boundary expansion. We're in a climate crisis. We can't be annexing farmland and wetlands and things like this. And then Margaret, I was in this email chain that Margaret had with some local people and environmentalists, and I had noticed the rise of Stop Sprawl Hamilton, Stop Sprawl Halton, and I think it was around that time that Stop Sprawl Hamilton, they ended up winning and getting their council to reject the urban boundary expansion. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a model for success, and it's a replicable model. And if like we can sit in Zoom meetings and email chains and talk about this and why we don't want this, but we need to actually do something and start some sort of campaign. So yeah, I pitched the idea to Margaret and she was all for it. And so then I sent the idea to the email chain. We had a meeting going and it just kind of took off from there.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, what do you think people that have latched onto this campaign like about it?
I think people just want spaces where they can connect with others about how we live our lives and relate to each other, and like an open democratic forum where we can do this. And most people care about environmental protection, but there's just not many outlets to connect about this and make meaningful change. So I think to have like, especially with the Facebook group, I find like it's just an open democratic forum where anyone can post and interact and share ideas and resources, and to have that and feel like you're a part of something big, a part of a movement that's big and has a tangible goal, which is obviously rejecting our urban boundary expansion. And I forgot to mention that the number, like the amount of land Orillia is trying to annex is 939 acres, so almost 1,000 acres. So yeah, just coming together and like working together and, getting involved, writing to council, getting a lawn sign, showing public displays of support and connecting with your neighbors and your friends and talking about real issues is meaningful for people.
It's meaningful community building, right? And I think going back to the Orillia thing a little bit with the details, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that there was, when the consultant said, well, we only need a little bit of land here, but when we really forecast out and we think about how much, people could be coming or what we could be doing, it was like, if we're going to annex, we might as well annex more than what we need in the immediate future just to make sure that we have enough versus like we've crossed all the T's and dot all the I's and we're going to only take as much as we absolutely need, right?
Yeah, and I was shocked that was like explicitly stated that this is like an overestimation, way more than we even need. And then the other thing with the land needs assessment is that one of the slides says like other options are planning for higher intensification, like that was among the range of options. And it's like, why are we not looking at planning for intensification before we're just recklessly looking to expand the boundary? Like, where's the intensification plan? Why is this just considered like at the very last slide among another range of options? Like, why isn't this being looked at first?
Right.
How many hectares did you say the proposed expansion was?
939 acres.
Right. Almost 1,000. Sorry, did you have a follow-up question, Adam?
Yes, but my dog was barking. Almost 1,000 hectares.
Acres.
Okay.
Yeah,
wow.
They use hectares. Like it's 380 hectares. But one of the little tips I got from the Stop Sprawl Hamilton organizers was to convert hectares into acres when you're talking to the community. So 380 hectares equals 939 acres, which looks bigger because it is a huge amount of land. And I don't know if it's just technical reasons why they use hectares or it's to make it look smaller, but yeah, we've been referring to it as acres.
So the current size of Orillia is just over 7,000 acres. Mm-hmm. So that's about 1/7 of the size. Mm-hmm. That's a large expansion for it's a small city. It's 31,000 people.
Mm-hmm. Something like that.
And what do you, off the top of your head, do you have the number that the population that they're supposed to plan for?
I think it's about 49,000. So right now
to be 49,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but if you do that math though for a second, they fit 31,000 and 7,000 hectares, right? Or 30. So we're talking about they're going to put an additional 10 or 10 something thousand in 1,000. You know what I mean? Like how much they already have fit into 7,000. Now all of a sudden they need a larger proportion to fit just a small fraction of that. Like it's pretty ridiculous. And I think anybody that's been through Orillia would not look at it as a very dense community. I mean, I looked at some Google Maps and if you go look by where the Costco and the university is, like talk about poster child for sprawling, housing, like it just ridiculous.
Yeah,
right?
Well, I did a presentation today to a high school class about Stop Sprawl Orillia, and I was trying to put the idea of urban sprawl into simple terms to make it easily understandable. And I kind of just said to the students, think West Ridge in Orillia, which is like what you were talking about, the Costco area. And then when I tell people that, they're like, say no more.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that the principle that you is putting the cart before the horse a little bit, right? Like Orillia is not, as has been mentioned, it's not a dense built form currently. And that has a whole bunch of different, and again, back to these externalities, that has a whole bunch of consequences. Greatly increased reliance on car use, right? So for most people in Orillia, and this is the same for most communities in Canada, and certainly in Simcoe County, you have to get in your vehicle to be able to buy groceries, just to get food. For fuck's sake, you need to get in a car. You need to own a car. And that's an incredibly unreliable form of development, right? Like that if you want to build resilience, you want people to have options, different types of options, and especially options in the ways that they are able to access the things most necessary to live. If you rely on a car to get food, what if if the roads wash out, if there's a natural disaster?
Gas prices are too high and you can't fill up your tank.
Exactly. And that's another thing, right? Gas prices. Exactly. All those sorts of, and then there's also the effects that car use, and the corollary, reduction in walking, has on physical health of people and the expenditures that we have to put towards healthcare. Cars are the leading killer of kids. It's an insane amount of children that are killed by cars every year, and all these sorts of things. So that principle that you build a community up to become something that is sort of your ideal version, right, of what a community can be. But that, for the development that happens in our area, for some reason, there's this sort of weak work that happens towards that kind of thing. And then they expand, and all of that work that they've put into trying to intensify, create communities where, transit is more cost effective, because transit relies on the number of people using it. Otherwise it relies on, taxpayer support and this sorts of. Anyways, the work that's put into trying to create these communities that really are complete communities, that are truly resistant, that are resilient, that are healthy for people to live in, it just collapses as soon as we expand outwards like that, because it's just time and time again, it's the route of least resistance that our politicians take, and that is almost always building suburban development.
Yeah, and it's like Margaret said, it just seems lazy almost, or it's like it's been this way for so long, so why should we change? And I've been actually doing like deep dives lately into the history of city planning and urban sprawl and zoning, and like the history of it is crazy if you look back to in the 1910s there were like laws that were overtly racist and explicitly prohibited people from buying property if they were a racial minority, and then a couple decades later R1 zoning was introduced, which was basically to maintain white only neighborhoods and subdividing them into sections where it was only legal to build big expensive single family homes. And just the exclusionary history and of suburban sprawl and the roots of these things is crazy. And it's crazy that city politicians are actively trying to change this and go for complete community.
Every so often on social media, I come across one of those videos of the bridge and there's a few of them around, I think mainly in the US, but the bridge that is just slightly too low for trucks to be able to get under it. Have you seen these? And they're driving along and they don't heed the warning signs, and the top of the container is just sheared off. There's a reason why bridges were built low, right? Do you know why?
I don't know.
Well, it was so buses couldn't go under them, because buses were the mode of transportation for poor people. And for the most part, poorer people were racialized people. So they were a means of keeping people out of areas where they were undesirable.
And we can't also forget that the fossil fuel companies and the developers and auto manufacturers back, once where they were trying to put a car in everybody's driveway, all of a sudden came up with this wonderful plan that they sold to the Americans, which we then easily adopted as well, which was like, hey, you can build these really far-flung communities. You have a nice drive, nice windy road. Like, there was an actual campaign to ensure that this type of development became the go-to, right? All of the facts, all of the things that we needed. Not only did it keep certain people out, it also provided, a lot of whole new consumers to get into cars and to get into the white picket fence mentality. And we really haven't erased that yet. And yet we're seeing community inequity increase. And I know that's something that Stop Sprawl Orillia is really focused on, is the affordability of the housing that's being provided. Like, what type of community, what type of equitable community are you providing? What kind of business environment, right? I know that it's not, I know that Stop Sprawl Orillia, same with Stop Sprawl Hamilton, sounds just very simple, but when you dig into it, it's not just about stopping something. It's about choosing a better alternative, right, Madeleine?
Oh, exactly. Yeah. It's been really crazy to realize how much land use planning and urban sprawl and intensification, all these things like shape our lives, our everyday lives. I used to never think about it, but it really is. It impacts every aspect of our life, like housing, the environment, food security, transit, all these things. And to the affordability point you made, that's been a really big part of our campaign, and it's also a big argument that people try to use against us, like, the classic argument that we need more homes, there's an affordability crisis, so if we build more homes, like the whole supply and demand argument, which is very flawed. But so that's one of the hardest parts of the campaign, is just trying to tackle this misinformation. And people generally come from a good place. Like if their argument is that, well, we need to expand because we need affordable housing, like that's coming from a good place. And we can all agree that we need affordable housing. It's just coming to that common ground of how we can actually get affordable housing, and the fact that urban sprawl is not a sustainable, meaningful solution to the affordable housing crisis. And who is urban sprawl really for? If you follow the money, you can typically find it.
Oh, for sure. And if you think about it, like the rules that we have, the system we have set up now have been in place for decades, as you were kind of mentioning earlier. So we are basically saying, just let the system do what it's been doing. It's been going fine. And really, it hasn't been going fine. How many different choices of housing do people have in Orillia, right? How many people can actually find attainable housing or rentals in Orillia? And it's not just one government's fault or one municipality's fault. I mean, at the base of it is, like you said earlier, is zoning and provincial policy. All of those things really haven't done what they were supposed to do to make housing more affordable. So why would we allow the system to keep producing more of the same? And I think that's where I've had a couple of people go, oh yeah, that's right. Like we keep sprawling onto farmland, and it's almost like the highway thing, right? If we just keep building more sprawl, eventually we'll get to the point where we have so much we won't need anymore. Just build one more highway. Eventually the congestion will stop, right?
Well, again, with the costs that come with that form of development, the loss of agricultural land, the loss of habitat for wildlife, and on, carbon sinks, carbon sequestration, all these sorts of things, flooding, prevention with wetlands, all these. There's so many costs, externalities associated with this form. So that is one. But another thing with the affordability argument that is rarely addressed, and it drives me nuts. I don't know what the deal is with housing. It's a weird kind of groupthink, like on Twitter and things like that. But one of the things that is rarely ever addressed is the fact that it's a basket of things, affordability. It's not just the cost of a house, right? The need to own a car. That's that in Canada, and we've cited this stat a number of times. In Canada, the cost of car ownership, and this is from a few years ago now, not many. It was relevant up until recently, I'd assume, with the cost of gas increasing considerably. But the cost was $10,000 a year per car. That's and that's not
for
if you don't have to own a car.
That's just for basic.
No. Well, that's on average. Yeah. So you could have some cheaper, and you can have some more expensive, of course. But that's on average. It's $10,000 a year in Canada to own a vehicle, and that includes the cost of maintenance and insurance and all these sorts of things. But if you didn't have to own a vehicle, so you're a family with your typical 2 vehicles, well, there's plenty out there that have more than that, but $20,000 a year you could be putting towards something else. What would that be? That's a huge affordability variable right there. Again, I mean, the health benefits that come from living in walkable communities, being able to walk your kids to school, you take the savings that you have, you work a day less a week, right? Then you're able to sort of create community cooperatives for daycare, where you can sort of trade off with each other and look after kids in the street, on the street, whatever, on your street. Driving costs down. There's all kinds of opportunities, options that all of a sudden open up when you start building communities that are actually for people instead of cars. And that's this whole affordability. It's a bit of a farce as long as all you're looking at is the cost of a house.
Mm-hmm. You have to look at the community affordability, right? And I was just going through the travel survey here from Simcoe County, because there's some data that I pulled. Almost 25% of all households in the county own 3 or more vehicles.
Oh, wow.
It's huge. And Barrie and Orillia are the top work locations of workers within the county. So, Orillia has an economy that draws a lot of other residents to it. And sprawling isn't really going to help with that, because you need somewhere for the workers to live. The other thing is that in Simcoe County, 30% of all home to work trips are under 5 kilometers. Right? 40% of them are under 15 kilometers. So there's this feeling that like we need to have more roads and more cars. But when you start looking at the data, you go, well, actually, that's not a very long trip. You probably could plan it other ways, or people are mostly going to these locations. So what if we just provided housing in those areas so that people didn't have to drive to Orillia or drive to Barrie, and they could actually afford a house in there, right? Mm-hmm. And interestingly, traffic congestion, like in the built up areas or in the cities, Barrie, Orillia, that sort of thing, traffic congestion was the lowest major concern of all the residents. The biggest concern was safety, mostly to deal with drivers. So this whole development pattern isn't really matching with what people are feeling, how they want their communities to move forward. And I thought maybe you could outline a little bit about what you guys see from Stop Sprawl Orillia, the kind of community you'd like to ensure happens.
Yeah, I think definitely, upgrading our transit system. We have these huge honking buses in Orillia that there's usually like upwards of maybe 5 people in them. The buses only come every half hour. Bus routes don't come to every area of Orillia. They don't run long enough hours. There's all sorts of flaws within the transit system, as well as it just being expensive, and they are raising the price every year. So yeah, an active transit system is important with more efficient buses. And then there's the food issue. Through Green Orillia, Jacob and I, we actually made this map of food deserts in Orillia. I'm just pulling up here so I can refer to it. But it stems from this whole idea about food deserts and food apartheid. So there's this map, the food map of Orillia, that shows kind of grocery stores and places to access food within the city. And then the next photo we show is a low income map of Orillia. And you can see that they're directly related. So the areas with the lowest income have the least access to grocery stores, which obviously harms low income people in a lot of ways. It's more expensive to go to more affordable grocery stores. So then they usually have to spend more money on more expensive grocery stores because they're closer. Also overdependence on conveniently located fast food options, disproportionately higher rates of easily preventable diet-related illness and disease as a result of food insecurity, all these things. So yeah, creating more food access options, especially in lower income areas, and as well as just not paving over farmland to increase current or future food security. That's another common argument, is like, oh, no one's even farming the current farmland in the area. And it's like, it doesn't matter whether someone is currently farming it or not. Like, if we pave it over, once it's gone forever. So you never know what can happen in the future, where that land will be passed down to, or how it will be utilized for food security. So yeah, 2 of the main ones are definitely the transit system and food security.
And don't you find, Madeleine, that really at the end of the day, this is something that I find, and I know Adam and I talk about it, is that like really governments are just asking the wrong questions. We're debating about, the government's debating about whether they're going to sprawl tall or sprawl wide or build highways, and no one's talking about housing as a right. Yeah. Like, what if you just said everyone should have a right to a house, what would that do for the conversation and how we build our communities? Or what if everybody has a right to be able to access groceries within a 2 kilometer radius? I don't know, like pick a number, right? What if we said everyone has a right to fresh water? Like, it's so amazing that, or Ontarians have to be focused on increasing our food security. It's all of these long-term kind of questions that nobody's really asking, and as a population, we're stuck in the weeds about, well, should we build this or that, or where or how? And we're fighting over, like, it drives me nuts that in this day and age, with all of the science we have with climate and biodiversity, that we're still tinkering around whether we should build highways through a protected green space. We have big fish to fry here. And not saying that building a highway is a little thing, but this should be an issue we've moved past, similar to the annexation with Orillia. Do we really have to be talking about how much wetland and farmland we're going to be paving over for actually roadways and more commercial buildings that may not even have people in them down the road, for more ticky-tacky kind of like McMansions? Like, is that a conversation that we should even be having now? And it's so frustrating to feel like we're pulled into these really outmoded ways of community development, and we're missing the big picture here. And it's like, Stop Sprawl Orillia can really help bring awareness to those big issues, but there's so much resistance, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and it's so hard when our feels like our whole province is essentially run by bankers, developers, and home builders. I mean, yeah, if you look at a graphic that's like shows the developer ties to the PC party, it's insane. And so you can tell where different interests lie and who politicians are trying to please. And then there's also the affordable housing report that recently came out. That's, basically what you would expect if you brought together these bankers, developers, and home builders. And the Affordable Housing Report explicitly states that building affordable housing is outside its mandate, and it never once mentions the term rent control. I was reading about this. So is it really an affordable housing report? So
just more affordable housing for people that probably can already afford it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's really, if we're cutting to the chase, that's kind of what we're getting at, right? There's a difference between attainable housing and housing as a right versus what is going into what is affordable housing. Oh, sure. Just increase the supply so that everybody that's making over 150 grand, 200 a year can afford a cheaper house. But what about the remainder of the population that's which is a majority of the population that's below that? What solutions do you have for them? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that the greatest benefit of this campaign beyond stopping sprawl is just trying to bring people together and take the power back and, assert that this is our community and people should be put before profit. And we have a right to determine how our community is shaped for future generations.
I kind of feel like municipalities have been tricked a little bit, hoodwinked. Like they think development is actually about housing, because developers, I don't think, actually look at development as if it's housing is almost secondary. Housing is the product. Well, it's a profit maximizer, right?
Yeah.
So where you have access to a lot of land, it makes sense to build low and spread out initially. That's just what that's what's going to convert your investment in that land into the greatest profit. Where you don't have a lot of land, it makes sense for developers where there's demand to build high. Or at least to build as high to a height that justifies the demand, because above a certain, several floors, the height of development goes up considerably. So this is why, for instance, on Billionaires Row in New York, and that's where the demand is. You're not going to see that built form replicated in very many other places. But if you look at it through that lens, that what's actually important is the land. And there's this old saying, which is something along the lines, I'm probably butchering it, but buy land because they aren't building any more of it. If you look at it through that lens, that land is what is actually the important thing. If a municipality were to do that, they would be looking at the land that they have, and they would be looking at how they can maximize the utility of that land, right? You wouldn't have vacant lots scattered all throughout the municipality. They would be maximizing, they would be pressuring the landowners to build on those in the most efficient, effective built form that contributes to the life of the city in the best way possible. But I don't, but municipalities, for some reason, they've been tricked into thinking that this is somehow about housing or the buildings themselves. I mean, they are, as Margaret said, they're the byproduct. It's about maximizing, getting the best value out of what you've got. That's what developers do if they're successful, right? If a developer isn't going to do that, they're not going to last long in the industry. And we see that dynamic in municipalities. If municipalities were a business, they would have gone bankrupt by now. Almost all of them.
Frankly, a lot of them are teetering on it already. I mean, all you have to do is look into how much money they owe for infrastructure, right? That they're not keeping up. And so there's that whole thing, hate the game, not the player. And I think it's really easy to always hate on the developers, but they're only playing within the rules generally within the rules that they're allowed to play within. And right now, the rules are set up that you can make housing a commodity. You can jack up the prices of it to increase your own profit. You don't have to treat it kindly. You don't even have to do environmental assessments if you get the right connections, right? Like, there is a very lax control system that recognizes, to, like Adam said, about the importance of land. And even if they recognize the importance of land, they're still looking at it from a GDP perspective. Like, how much money can we get from this piece of land versus how do we focus this land on the well-being of our constituency, which is not a thing that many governments are dealing with, which is where those big questions lie, right? They lie in what is the well-being of our community? I know that's something that you guys are thinking about too.
Mm-hmm.
I have one question about it, Madeleine, is that, you're a younger person, younger than me, which isn't hard anymore. I'm turning 45 soon, got another week or so. So yay for me. And I know that Orillia prides itself on its climate friendly, progressive nature. So how do you square that peg? Like, how do you make that work? Is it that the city isn't aware of that this leads to climate? Is it that it's their climate action is more performative? Like, how do you make those two things jive?
Yeah, essentially the latter. Yeah, I mean, Orillia is coming up with this climate change action plan that they're developing, and it's mostly about greenhouse gas emissions and center a lot. I think there's three main categories, like transportation, and then like buildings and retrofitting, that kind of thing. And then I can't remember what the third one is, but those are the main ones. Is like, yeah, vehicles and buildings. And it's great that we're developing a climate change action plan, and I think around 500 municipalities in Canada have declared this climate emergency. Orillia is not one of them, interestingly. But it doesn't seem like the city wants to acknowledge the way that land use planning affects climate change, because there's no talk in the climate change action plan so far of land use planning or intensification or protecting farmland and wetlands, not expanding the boundary. So yeah, I can't help but see it just as greenwashing by creating this climate change action plan. Not to mention that it just doesn't seem accessible. Like, if so much of this climate change action plan is promoting electric vehicles, which are so expensive and inaccessible for most of the community, it's like, is this really a community climate change action plan? I'm not hearing a lot of talk about creating a robust, active transit system and Yeah, and then there's the whole inch farm controversy recently where the city is allowing the inch farm to be developed, which is a wetland, and basing it off of an environmental assessment from over 30 years ago. And there's local experts saying that it is a wetland, and it's still a debate whether or not it is a wetland. So, yeah, land protection, land use planning. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it feels like greenwashing for sure.
What do you find as a young adult? Like, you don't have to speak for all younger people by any stretch, but as a young adult who's now organizing, what do you find most frustrating about this whole issue?
Oh man. Probably just I would say, yeah, just kind of the trolls or the misinformation, or it's like we're going in circles about the details of the issue. It's like, oh, we should be doing this, or we should be doing it this way, or like just getting too hung up on the details and the best way to go about things and what the real root of the issue is. But it's like we all know deep down that we're in a climate emergency and we need to protect farmlands and wetlands and that we need affordable housing. Like, we know the bare bones facts, but it's like it just feels so frustrating to efficiently organize people. Yeah. I mean, it's like we know the problem, so let's look at solutions and work together to do this. But it can be frustrating feeling just, trying to organize.
Well, which is why the IPCC report, when it came out, said one of the biggest barriers to climate action is misinformation of the political class and consultants from the fossil fuel industry, or those that would benefit from fossil fuel production, right? So it becomes really difficult. There is a thing, and I know I've talked to you about it privately. We've had some kind of conversations about organizing and that sort of thing, and it becomes really difficult because it's assumed that if you are in the political class, that you have the authority and the facts, and nothing that you say should be challenged, right? It's just, well, this person said it, so this must be true. And then the people that are, local organizers, people who've done their research, local experts, like whatever, all of a sudden have to get fact checked like 5 times. And are you sure that's right? But they said this, and we have to worry about the balance between what you said, which is verifiable, and what they said, which isn't verifiable, right? Like, it makes it very, very challenging.
Yeah, it gets easier, and especially dealing with trolls on public forums like Facebook and these things. Like, I find if you just stand your ground and say it in a calm, respectful way and just like stick with the facts and you keep the dialogue going rather than just attacking each other, like, you typically can get to some sort of common ground. Like, there was this one person who was commenting on one of our news articles and just, totally questioning everything and disagreeing. But then me and a few other people, we kept commenting back and forth with like facts and staying calm and trying to find a common ground. And by the end, he was like, yeah, wow, like that was you articulate your points very well. Like, you make good points. It's hard to disagree with that. So yeah, I mean, even if people are disagreeing, just keeping the dialogue open and trying to find some sort of common ground has been helpful for me, at least. Yeah,
absolutely. Adam, do you have a question before we get close to wrap up here?
Yeah, I would add to the consultants obfuscating. I don't know why my mouth just sort of seized up when I said that. There is a growing industry of environmental consultants as well. A lot of them are employed by municipalities. Certainly a lot are employed by industry and things like that. And I wouldn't necessarily say the work that they are doing is greenwashing, but it fits into a system, a process that is to a fairly high degree exclusionary. So you mentioned at the outset there, the town hall, the public town hall that they had on this. These are often sort of set up in a way that only certain people who are willing and able to engage in a certain way are able to participate, right? So, I mean, first of all, you've got to be comfortable with speaking in public and confronting people who are established as experts. And that can sometimes be overcome, even if it's a scary thing. But there are people for whom that is an insurmountable barrier. And there's a lot of other things that go into this. Margaret and I have talked about this a lot in the past, but the work and effort that citizens are expected to do on their own time, in addition to everything else that they do, to be able to engage in these processes, right? And even then, it is not considered to be on an equal footing. I mean, there might be some lip service given to it being equal footing, but I don't think that's actually how it's received. So these, environmental consultants are situated within a process that is exclusionary and that filters information in certain ways to certain places that reinforce certain hierarchies and power structures. And all of which to say that it's, for organizing citizens, for grassroots organizing, for citizen participation, for democracy, right? Which is really what we're getting at here, for democracy, for democratic participation, for determining how your communities take shape in an active and positive way. Those are difficult things within the system that we've got. And unfortunately, I guess in a sense, it's it's not intentional greenwashing, but in some ways that's the effect, because when you have consultants who are, they have degrees in the area, for instance, in environmental studies or what have you, but they work for firms that are employed by municipalities and things like that. They give some cover, I think, to the decisions that are made, even though the processes that have made those decisions are the same processes that have made and contributed, constrained, shaped decisions that are environmentally destructive, right? So I think that they are complicit in this to a degree. I think that there has to be some recognition that the system is broken, that the processes that serve that system need to be addressed and changed. And that's, I think, the stuff that groups like yours, like Stop Sprawl Orillia, like the other Stop Sprawl organizations, that's part of the work that you guys are doing and doing really successfully. And I think that, it's not going to be easy, but it's really important work. And I think that we should all be very grateful for it.
So a hat tip to you there, Madeleine.
Thank you. Back to your question, Margaret, about what the hardest part of this is. I'd say another hard part is just trying to even, kind of like what Adam's talking about, is get easily accessible information. Part of the land needs assessment was there was a map on one of the slides of the report, and it was showing a map of Orillia, and it had a legend that showed areas where there's more potential for infill and vacant spaces. And I'm zooming in on this map on the report, but it's blurry because it's some sort of screenshot or something. So then I email city staff asking for a high resolution version of the photo to see the intensification options. And then they just tell me that it was produced by consultants, not in-house. And so they don't have a photo and they can't give me it. So it's just things like this. It's hard to even get involved if you want to, because of, this non-participatory, undemocratic system that we live in. So that's another super frustrating part. And luckily I have the time and energy and resources to try to do deep dives into these things, but most people don't. So yeah.
Well, we know that life well, Madeleine, as you know, because we've had these conversations of trying to access information. And then I always love the comments that are don't you guys have anything better to do? Yeah, actually, we have a lot of stuff we would rather do, but you can't it's almost like the Matrix, once you've taken that pill, you're like, okay, well, I have to make sure that this actually is the answer that's supposed to come out. Right. So I get it. We're just going to wrap up here. And I wanted to give you a chance to talk about how to connect with Stop Sprawl Orillia, how people can help. I'm sure Adam will put some stuff in the show notes too. So there'll probably be a website link or, your Facebook groups, but I'd just like to hear it from you about how people can get involved, how to get a hold of you, where to find out more information.
Thanks. Yeah. So we have our website, stopsprawlorillia.ca, and most of the details and action items are on there. But I'd say there's like 4 key action items we're pushing because something that, various mentors and Stop Sprawl organizers have drilled into me is like the key for this campaign is public visual displays of opposition to the boundary expansion so that council can see that. Like council needs to directly hear and see from us. So the key action items are sending an email to mayor and council. We have a one-click email tool on our website where you just put your email and then write a letter and suggested points are mentioned. So yeah, emailing mayor and council, requesting a lawn sign. The lawn signs are free or by donation, and anyone in Orillia and surrounding area can get one. Signing the petition we have, and then submitting a letter to the editor in Orillia Matters is also very impactful. The news coverage goes a long way, especially for those who aren't on social media, like various elderly populations can find out about the movement this way. And then, following the Facebook and Instagram. We just hit 400 members in our Facebook group, so it's exciting. It's been growing. And then, we also do take general volunteers, so we need help with door knocking for lawn signs and then just driving around to help distribute lawn signs. And there's various other volunteer roles. And you can also email me at greenorillia@gmail.com. And I think that's all.
That's awesome. Well, we really appreciate, Adam and I are always rooting for the grassroots guys because they never usually have enough help and never have enough resources and are doing a lot of heavy lifting. So welcome to the club. And for those listeners that are out there that keep thinking about, geez, how do I make an impact on climate? How do I make an impact for, my children's future or for just people's future in general? Like this is one of those initiatives that you have, youth leading it or younger adults leading it that need anybody to come and help and do not just think climate action is going to take care of itself at some federal policy level and rely on that. It's in the trenches here, if you will. In your local community. So guess what? If you don't live in Orillia, why don't you stop a Stop Sprawl initiative in your own municipality? And you can hit us up and we can connect you with Madeleine and we can talk about it because this isn't going to be won by just one single person. It's a collective effort, as Adam and I talked about before.
Yeah. And I also want to say a huge thank you and shout out to Margaret for all the support and mentoring thus far. I think having different mentors like Nancy from Stop Sprawl Hamilton and Margaret have been super helpful for me and inspiring and empowering. So thank you. Women supporting women and youth supporting youth and all these things have been really awesome.
Yeah, I'm happy to be there for you, and we're happy to highlight your cause for sure because we're all in agreement. Do you have any last words, Adam? Not last words, but just last of the podcast.
Yeah, but scary. Well, not really. Just if you liked this episode and like any of the other episodes that you may have listened to, please leave a rating on whatever platform you're using. That really helps with the profile of the show. It helps us get heard more. And, I don't know, actually, maybe this is another question of support. I was just about to sort of do our pitch for support, but Madeleine, do you guys have a way for people to donate?
Oh yes, I forgot to mention that. We're partnered with Small Change Fund to host donations online, and through them we're able to provide charitable tax receipts. So the link to that is on the website as well. We have over $1,000 fundraised so far, and then Stop Sprawl Halton also transferred some of their donation funds to us, and we have some cash donations as well. So it's been really great, and that helped us pay for lawn signs, and hopefully if we get more donations we can get more lawn signs. So yes, thanks for plugging that.
All right, amazing. Well, that is the support us plug right there. So you can find that.
There's no reason for anybody to be upset, because what you just heard was a whole bunch of people all over the province helping each other. This is mutual aid at the organizing level. So don't be down about what's happening. Actually, just realize there's lots of people that are coming out to help, and you can be a part of it too.
Mm-hmm.
Rah, rah.
So that's smallchangefund.ca. And do you offhand know the campaign name?
It's just
probably Stop Sprawl Orillia.
I think. But yeah,
Stop Sprawl Orillia. Okay.
And we're on there too, right. Just so you know.
We are, but if you're making a choice,
yes, I know.
Yeah, do the Stop Sprawl Orillia this time. That'd be great. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening. And we're doing this on a monthly basis now. So Margaret and I keep our sanity. And we'll see you in April.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Madeleine.